In the year 1273, in a prosperous wool town nestled between the rolling hills of the Cotswolds, a weaver named Oswald tends to his craft with the same measured patience his father taught him decades before. Welcome to this quiet hour of the night. I am honored to share this time with you. As darkness settles around us, we will journey together to a cloth merchant's workshop in autumn England, following Oswald through the rhythms of preparing wool and setting a new warp thread upon his great loom. Allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort, knowing that this story asks nothing of you but to simply listen and rest. The workshop holds the morning's first light with a tenderness that seems to slow time itself. Oswald, 47 years old, stands before his loom in the stillness, his weathered hands resting on the wooden frame. The scent of lanolin, that earthy, animal warmth from the raw wool, mingles with the older smell of timber that has absorbed decades of moisture and oil. His graying auburn hair catches the amber glow from the small window, and he allows himself a long, unhurried breath before beginning. The fleece waits in a woven basket beside the workbench, creamy white with touches of gray where the sheep's natural coloring shows through. He lifts a handful, feeling its weight, the slight oiliness that clings to his calloused fingers. This wool came from the hills just beyond the town walls, sheared in spring and stored through the warm months. Now, with October settling cool and damp across the land, it is time to transform these fibers into something useful and lasting. Oswald hums a plainchant melody while working, the same tune he learned as a boy in the church choir. His voice barely rises above a whisper, more a vibration in his chest than an actual sound. He spreads the fleece across the wide table, picking through it with attentive care, removing bits of hay and the occasional burr that clings stubbornly to the fibers. His movements follow a rhythm established over 30 years of this same task: lift, examine, pull away debris, set aside. Each motion flows into the next, with the ease of water finding its course. The light from the window shifts by slow degrees as the sun climbs. Dust motes drift through the amber beams, turning and catching the glow like tiny stars suspended in honey. The room itself seems to breathe with him, the old walls creaking occasionally as the timbers adjust to the day's temperature. Beneath his feet, the packed earth floor holds the coolness of night still, a pleasant contrast to the growing warmth where sunlight touches his shoulders. When the first portion of fleece has been examined and readied, Oswald carries it to the row of carding paddles that hang on wooden pegs. The paddles are worn smooth from years of handling, their leather straps softened and shaped to his grip. He takes down 2 of them, feeling their familiar weight settle into his palms. The wire teeth catch the light, hundreds of tiny points that will tease the wool fibers into alignment. He works the fleece between the paddles with long, sweeping strokes. The motion creates a whispering sound, a gentle rasp that fills the workshop with its own kind of music. The wool begins to transform under his attention, the tangled mass slowly becoming a cloud of aligned fibers. His shoulders move in an easy rhythm, the same motion repeated until the wool emerges light and airy, ready for spinning. The morning continues its gradual progression. Outside, he can hear the distant sound of the church bells marking the hour for terce, their bronze voices rolling across the town with a reassuring constant. Somewhere beyond his walls, a cart passes on the cobbled street, its wheels creating a hollow rumbling that fades slowly into the general quiet of the day. Closer, just outside his window, a thrush begins its melodic series of phrases, each one slightly different from the last. Oswald sets aside the first batch of carded wool and takes up another handful of fleece. His mind settles into the work with a deep contentment that comes from doing what he knows, what his hands understand without thought. There is a meditation in this repetition, a way that the task holds him gently in the present moment. He notices how the light has changed, grown warmer and more golden. He notices the particular texture of this new section of wool, slightly coarser than the last. He notices his own breathing, steady and even, matching the pace of his hands. The wool gradually accumulates in soft piles on the table, organized by the fineness of the fiber. The best will become thread for delicate work, for altar cloths or the fine tunics of wealthy merchants. The coarser wool will make sturdy fabric for everyday wear, the kind that lasts season after season. Oswald appreciates each type equally, understanding that all wool has its purpose, its place in the world of cloth and comfort. By the time the bells ring for sext marking midday, he has prepared enough wool to begin the spinning. But first, he pauses to eat the simple meal he prepared before dawn. Bread, dense and dark with the flavor of rye, and a wedge of hard cheese aged to a pleasant sharpness. A wooden cup of small ale, cool from the stone floor where the jug rested overnight. He eats slowly, sitting on the bench by the window, watching the street beyond. A woman passes carrying a basket, her footsteps creating a gentle rhythm on the stones. Two children dart by, their voices bright but not loud, engaged in some game that requires running between the houses. The everyday life of the town unfolds with its usual grace, each person moving through their day with the same patient attention he brings to his own work. When the meal is finished, Oswald returns to his task. He retrieves the spinning wheel from its place in the corner, carrying it to the spot where the light falls most evenly. The wheel is old, older than himself, inherited from his father along with this workshop and the great loom. Its wood has darkened with age and handling, polished smooth by countless hours of contact. He runs his hand along the rim, feeling the familiar contours, the slight wobble that has been there for as long as he can remember, but that never interferes with its function. He sits on the low stool and begins to work the treadle with his foot. The wheel turns with a low, continuous hum, a sound that has filled this room for generations. He takes the first tuft of carded wool and begins to draft it, pulling the fibers gently as they twist and become thread. His hands know this motion so completely that he barely needs to watch them, his attention free to notice the way the twist travels up the forming thread, the way the fibers bind themselves together under the wheel's steady rotation. The afternoon unfolds like a scroll being unrolled with infinite care. The thread accumulates on the spindle, wrapping itself in even layers. Oswald maintains his easy pace, never rushing, allowing each length of thread to form at its own natural speed. The plain chant melody rises from his chest again, barely audible, a private accompaniment to the wheel's low song. The scent of baking bread begins to drift through the open window as his neighbor tends her oven. The yeasty warmth mingles with the wool smell, creating a combination that speaks of home and comfort and the ordinary goodness of daily life. A cat appears in the window, a tabby that belongs to no one and everyone, and settles itself in the rectangle of sunlight on the sill. It watches him for a moment with its inscrutable green eyes, then begins to wash its face with meticulous attention. When the light begins to take on the softer quality of late afternoon, Oswald has several spindles wound with fresh thread. He stands, stretching slightly, feeling the pleasant tiredness in his shoulders and back that comes from honest work. He moves to the great loom that dominates the far end of the workshop, running his hand along its frame with the same affection he might show a faithful old friend. Tomorrow, he will begin warping this loom with the thread he has made today, setting up the foundation for a new length of cloth. But for now, it is enough to have prepared the wool, to have transformed fleece into thread, to have moved through the day with attention and care. The bells ring for vespers, their sound floating through the cooling air, and Oswald feels the deep contentment settling over him like a familiar cloak. He tidies the workshop in the gathering dusk, returning tools to their places, sweeping stray fibers into a small pile that will eventually be felted into something useful. Nothing is wasted in this trade. Every scrap, every bit of fiber has its purpose and its value. The cat has departed from the window, off on whatever business occupies its evening hours, leaving only a warm spot where it rested. The last light fades from amber to rose to the soft purple of twilight. Oswald lights a single candle, its flame steady in the still air, and sits for a moment at his workbench. His weathered hands rest on the smooth wood, and he allows himself to simply be present in this moment, in this room that holds so much of his life, surrounded by the tools and materials of his craft. The day has been good, peaceful, filled with the satisfaction of work done well and without haste. Outside, the first stars begin to appear in the deepening sky, and the town settles into its evening rhythms. Somewhere a door closes softly, somewhere voices murmur in quiet conversation, somewhere a fire is being banked for the night. And in his workshop, Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, sits in the candlelight and feels grateful for the simplicity of it all, for wool and thread, for patient work, for days that unfold like this one, measured and mild and full of small, enduring pleasures. The next morning arrives with a pale mist clinging to the streets, softening every edge and corner of the town. Oswald wakes in his small room above the workshop, the air cool against his face where it emerges from beneath the wool blanket. He lies still for a moment, listening to the distant sound of the abbey bells calling the monks to lauds, their voices muted and dreamlike through the fog. He rises slowly, his body remembering the work of yesterday in a pleasant way, muscles that know they have been used well. The floorboards are cool beneath his feet as he crosses to the window, looking down at the street below where the mist makes everything mysterious and soft. A figure passes like a ghost, probably the baker's apprentice on his way to start the ovens, his footsteps creating a gentle rhythm that fades into the general hush. Oswald dresses in his usual tunic and hose, the wool worn comfortable and familiar against his skin. He pulls on a heavier outer tunic, for the autumn mornings require it now, and descends the narrow stairs to the workshop. The room holds the coolness of night, and he moves first to the hearth, coaxing embers back to life with careful additions of kindling. The wood catches slowly, crackling as the flames grow, and he positions himself near the growing warmth for a moment, hands extended toward the heat. The workshop takes on a different character in this early light, the mist outside creating a pearly glow that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. His loom stands waiting, the frame casting long shadows that shift as the fire grows stronger. The spindles of thread from yesterday rest on the workbench, neat rows of his labor transformed into something ready for the next stage. He eats a simple breakfast standing by the window, yesterday's bread softened in warm milk, sweetened with a small spoonful of honey. The warmth of it spreads through his chest, a comfort against the morning chill. He sips slowly, watching as the mist begins to lift in gradual stages, revealing first the outline of the building across the street, then the cobblestones below, then finally the far hills beyond the town walls. When the meal is finished, Oswald turns his full attention to the loom. Today's work will require different skills than yesterday's, a different kind of patience. He retrieves one of the spindles and begins the process of measuring the warp threads, the foundation upon which all else will be built. Each thread must be the exact same length, the exact same tension, or the finished cloth will pull unevenly, becoming distorted in the weaving. He has a measuring board for this purpose, a long piece of oak marked at precise intervals, the marks worn from years of use. He secures one end of the thread and begins to walk the length of the workshop, stretching it taut, then walking back, creating a figure-8 pattern that keeps the threads organized. His weathered hands move with practiced certainty, maintaining an even tension, neither too tight nor too loose. The motion becomes its own kind of meditation, walking forward, walking back, the thread paying out from the spindle in his hand. He hums his plain chant melody while working, the tune rising and falling with his steps. The fire crackles behind him, sending occasional sparks up the chimney. Outside, the town is waking fully now. He can hear the ringing of a hammer from the smithy down the street, the bleating of goats being led to pasture, the calling of vendors beginning to set up their stalls in the market square. Thread by thread, the warp accumulates on the measuring board. Oswald maintains his steady pace, moving through the task with the same unhurried attention he brings to all his work. There is no rushing this process. Each thread matters, each one contributes to the whole. His mind drifts pleasantly as his body performs the familiar motions, thinking of nothing in particular, simply present in the rhythm of the work. By the time the bells ring for terce, he has perhaps half the warp threads measured and ready. He pauses to rest, sitting on his workbench and flexing his fingers. The morning has grown warmer, and he opens the shutters wider, allowing the breeze to move through the workshop. It carries the scent of the season, wood smoke and damp earth, the faint sweetness of the last autumn flowers in someone's garden, the sharper smell of the tannery that operates 2 streets over. A neighbor passes the window and calls a greeting. Margaret, 38 years old, who weaves baskets and sells them in the market. Her work-roughened hands are stained with the dyes she uses, and her brown hair is bound up under a linen cap. They exchange a few words about the weather, about the quality of this year's willow harvest, their voices carrying the easy comfort of people who have known each other for many years. When she continues on her way, Oswald returns to his task. The afternoon will require transferring these measured threads to the loom itself, a process that demands even more care than the measuring. But first, more threads must be prepared. He takes up another spindle and resumes his walking, forward and back, the thread stretching between his hands and the measuring board, the rhythm as steady as breathing. The light shifts as the sun climbs higher, no longer filtered through mist but falling clear and golden through the windows. The shadows in the workshop change their angles, creeping across the floor in their slow daily journey. Oswald notices these changes without marking them particularly, his awareness held gently by the work, by the sensation of thread against his palms, by the sound of his own footsteps on the packed earth floor. A small brown bird lands on the windowsill, hops along its length, then flies away again. The cat from yesterday reappears, settling itself in a patch of sunlight to sleep, its body curled into a perfect circle of contentment. The town continues its daily rhythms beyond the walls of the workshop, wagons passing, voices rising and falling, the occasional bark of a dog, the laughter of children playing some game in the street. When the last thread has been measured, Oswald stands back and surveys his work. The measuring board is full now, thread wound in careful figure eights, ready to be transferred. He rolls his shoulders, feeling the pleasant tiredness there, and moves to prepare the loom for receiving this warp. The heddles must be checked, the reed examined for any broken sections, the cloth beam prepared to receive the finished fabric that will eventually emerge from all this preparation. He runs his hands along the loom's frame, checking for any rough spots that might catch and snag the delicate threads. His weathered fingers find a small splinter, and he retrieves a piece of fine sandstone from his tool collection, smoothing the spot with gentle circular motions until the wood is flawless again. These small attentions matter, these careful preparations that most people never see or think about. They are the foundation of quality work, of cloth that will last and serve well. The afternoon is well advanced when he begins the actual transfer of threads to the loom. This part requires him to stand in one position for long periods, his arms raised, threading each warp strand through its heddle, maintaining perfect order and tension throughout. It is work that engages both body and mind, requiring focus while also being repetitive enough to allow a kind of restful attention. He threads the first strand, then the second, working from left to right across the loom's width. Each heddle makes a soft clicking sound as the thread passes through, a gentle percussion that marks the progress of the work. His graying auburn hair falls forward slightly as he bends to see more clearly, and he brushes it back with the back of his hand, leaving a faint trace of lanolin that catches the light. The scent of supper cooking begins to drift from neighboring houses, onions and cabbage, the savory smell of pottage simmering, the yeasty warmth of more bread baking. Oswald's stomach reminds him gently that he has eaten little since morning, but the work has him now, and he wants to finish this section before stopping. There is a satisfaction in completing a clear portion of a task, in reaching a natural pause point where the work can rest without tension or incompletion. Thread by thread, the warp takes its place on the loom. The pattern begins to emerge, the vertical lines that will form the structure of the cloth. Each thread hangs with exactly the right tension, neither too tight nor too loose, each one parallel to its neighbors. Oswald's weathered hands move with the certainty of long practice, checking, adjusting, ensuring that everything is exactly as it should be. The bells ring for vespers, their sound washing over the town like a tide of bronze, and still he continues. The light is changing now, taking on the deeper gold of late afternoon, moving toward evening. The shadows grow longer, stretching across the workshop floor, and the cat wakes from its nap, stretches elaborately, and departs through the window on whatever business calls it away. When the last thread of this section has been placed, Oswald steps back and allows his arms to lower, feeling the blood flow back into muscles that have been held in position. He rotates his shoulders slowly, working out the stiffness, and permits himself a small smile of satisfaction. The work is progressing well, each stage completed with care, the cloth already beginning to exist in potential, if not yet in actuality. He moves to the door of the workshop and stands in the opening, looking out at the street as the day settles toward evening. The air has cooled again, carrying the promise of a chill night ahead. The sky is taking on the colors of sunset, pale rose and lavender, and the deep blue that appears in the east before the stars emerge. People are returning to their homes, their day's work complete, moving with the satisfied tiredness of those who have labored well. Oswald prepares a simple supper for himself, cheese and bread again, an apple from the small store he keeps in the coolest corner of the workshop, its flesh crisp and sweet with the particular flavor of autumn fruit. He eats slowly, sitting on the bench by the window, watching as the first lamps and candles are lit in the houses across the way, small points of warmth appearing in the growing darkness. When the meal is finished, he lights his own candle and sits for a time at his workbench, simply resting in the quiet of the evening. His weathered hands lie still on the smooth wood, and he feels the deep contentment settling over him once more. Tomorrow he will continue threading the warp, and the day after that he will begin the actual weaving, passing the shuttle back and forth, building the cloth row by row. But for now, it is enough to sit in the candlelight, to feel the day's work complete in his body, to hear the sounds of the town settling into sleep around him. Outside, the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The street grows quiet, only the occasional sound of a door closing or a voice calling a last good night breaking the stillness. And in his workshop, Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, sits in the gentle glow of his single candle and feels grateful for the gift of this work, for the patience it teaches, for the way it connects him to all the weavers who have come before and all who will come after, each one transforming thread into cloth, each one contributing their portion to the great tapestry of human making and doing and being. The third morning brings a change in the weather. Oswald wakes to the sound of rain, a steady pattering on the roof tiles that speaks of a day spent entirely indoors. He lies beneath his blanket for an extra moment, listening to the water's rhythmic voice, feeling the particular comfort that comes from being dry and warm while the world outside grows wet. When he rises and looks out the window, the street below is dark with moisture, the cobblestones gleaming like polished metal. Small rivulets run between the stones, carrying leaves and bits of straw toward the gutter at the street's edge. The sky hangs low and gray, the kind of sky that promises rain all day, perhaps into tomorrow. But this does not trouble him. The workshop is snug, the roof sound, and his work today requires no venturing out. He descends to the workshop and builds up the fire, adding larger pieces of wood to create a steady warmth. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the room takes on a cozy quality, a refuge from the damp chill outside. The smell of wood smoke mingles with the ever-present scent of wool, creating an atmosphere of comfort that seems to hold him gently as he moves about his morning preparations. His breakfast is porridge today, oats simmered slowly with water until they soften into something substantial and warming. He adds a pinch of salt, a small amount of honey, and eats standing near the fire, the wooden bowl warm in his weathered hands. The heat of the food spreads through him, fortifying him for the day's work ahead. The loom waits where he left it yesterday, the partially threaded warp hanging in neat vertical lines. Today he will complete this threading, finish the preparation, and if time allows, begin the actual weaving. The thought brings a quiet anticipation, not excitement exactly, but a pleased awareness that the work is progressing toward its completion. He positions himself at the loom and takes up the next thread from the measuring board. His fingers find the correct heddle, guide the thread through its eye, and let it hang with its proper tension. The motion is the same as yesterday, the same as he performed hundreds of times already, yet each thread still requires his full attention. This is the paradox of his craft. The work is repetitive but never mindless, familiar but never careless. The rain continues its steady percussion on the roof, a sound that becomes part of the workshop's atmosphere, as constant as the crackling of the fire. Oswald hums his plain chant melody while working, the tune weaving itself through his movements, another thread in the fabric of the day. His graying auburn hair catches the firelight as he bends and straightens, threading and checking, maintaining the perfect order that good cloth requires. Outside, he can hear occasional footsteps splashing through puddles, people moving about their necessary business despite the weather. A wagon passes, its wheels creating a deeper splash, the driver probably hurrying to reach shelter. But these sounds seem distant, softened by the rain, as if the workshop exists in its own separate world, a pocket of warmth and purpose held apart from the damp gray day beyond its walls. Thread follows thread through the heddles, and Oswald's weathered hands maintain their steady rhythm. His shoulders have learned the exact posture for this work, the angle that allows him to continue for hours without excessive strain. His feet know where to stand, his back how to hold itself. The knowledge lives in his body, accumulated over 3 decades of this same work, and he trusts it completely. By the time the bells ring for terce, their sound muted and mellow through the rain, he has made significant progress. More than half the remaining threads are now in place, hanging in perfect parallel lines, ready to receive the weft threads that will cross them horizontally, creating the interlaced structure of cloth. He steps back for a moment, rolling his shoulders, and allows himself to appreciate what has been accomplished. The cat appears at the window, looking bedraggled and displeased with the weather. Oswald opens the shutter wider, and the creature jumps down into the workshop, shaking itself vigorously and sending droplets flying. It makes its way immediately to the hearth, settling as close to the fire as safety allows, and begins the elaborate process of drying itself, licking its tabby fur into some semblance of order. Oswald watches the cat for a moment, a slight smile touching his face. There is something companionable about sharing the workshop's warmth with another living creature, even one as independent and self-possessed as this particular cat. He returns to his work, and the animal's purring adds another layer to the workshop's music. The rain, the fire, the soft clicking of heddles, and now this rumbling contentment from the hearth. The morning progresses in its unhurried way. Thread by thread, the warp grows more complete. Oswald's mind settles into that peaceful state that comes from work that engages the hands while leaving the thoughts free to drift. He thinks of nothing important, notices small things. The way the firelight moves on the wall, the particular sound the rain makes when the wind shifts direction, the feel of the thread against his calloused fingers. When midday arrives, marked by the bells ringing for sext, he pauses to eat. Bread and cheese again, an onion from his small store, sharp and crisp. He sits on the bench with his meal, the cat having moved to claim the warm spot where sunlight usually falls, though today there is no sun, only the gray light filtering through the rain. The animal sleeps deeply, having achieved perfect dryness, its body relaxed in that complete way that only cats seem to manage. After eating, Oswald stands before the loom once more. The end of the threading is in sight now, the remaining strands countable, manageable. He takes up the work again, his weathered hands finding their rhythm immediately, as if the pause never happened. The fire needs another log, and he adds one, watching the flames embrace it, sending up a shower of sparks that swirl up the chimney. The afternoon deepens, though with the heavy clouds it is hard to mark the sun's progression. The light remains constant, that gray luminosity that makes time feel suspended, neither morning nor evening but some space between. The rain continues without urgency, steady and patient, soaking into the earth, filling cisterns and water barrels, running down gutters and into drains. Oswald threads the final strand as the bells ring for none. He ties it off with careful attention, checks the entire warp one last time, running his hands along the threads to ensure everyone hangs true. The preparation is complete. Tomorrow, or perhaps even this evening if he feels moved to begin, he will load the shuttle with weft thread and start the actual weaving. But for now, this stage is finished, and he allows himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He moves to the workbench and begins to prepare the shuttle, winding it with thread from one of yesterday's spindles. The shuttle is made of smooth boxwood, polished by decades of use until it gleams like honey in the firelight. It fits his hand perfectly, the weight and balance familiar as his own heartbeat. He winds the thread carefully, ensuring it feeds smoothly, without tangles or snags that might interrupt the weaving. The rain begins to ease as afternoon moves toward evening, the steady drumming fading to a lighter patter, then to occasional drops that fall from the eaves with soft, irregular sounds. The clouds lift slightly, and a thin, watery light appears, not quite sunlight but something less oppressive than the morning's gray. The street outside glistens with moisture, and the air coming through the window carries the clean scent of rain-washed earth. Oswald walks to the door and stands looking out at the transformed town. Everything appears fresh, renewed, the dust and grime of daily life washed away. Water drips from roof edges, creating small waterfalls that splash into puddles below. A woman emerges from the house across the street, checking the weather, her face turned upward to assess the sky. She catches sight of him and waves, and he raises his hand in return, a simple acknowledgement of shared experience, of both having weathered the day's rain from the shelter of their separate spaces. He returns to the loom and studies it in the changing light. The warp threads hang like the strings of some enormous instrument, ready to be played. Tomorrow they will begin their transformation, crossed and recrossed by the weft, gradually becoming something new. No longer individual threads, but a unified piece of cloth, strong and useful and pleasing to the eye. But that is tomorrow's work. For now, the day is nearly complete, and he has accomplished what he set out to do. He prepares his evening meal, a more substantial pottage this time, with dried peas and a heel of bacon that flavors the broth. The smell fills the workshop as it simmers over the fire, savory and warming, and he tends it patiently, stirring occasionally, letting the ingredients soften and meld into something greater than their individual parts. The cat wakes and stretches, arching its back in that elaborate way cats have, each vertebra seeming to move independently. It comes to wind around his ankles, clearly hopping for a share of the supper, and he obliges with a small piece of bacon torn from the pot. The animal takes it delicately and retires to eat in private, as is its custom. When the pottage is ready, Oswald ladles it into his wooden bowl and sits once more by the window. The sky is clearing now, ragged patches of blue appearing between the clouds, and the western horizon shows touches of gold where the sun approaches its setting. The street is quiet, most people having chosen to remain indoors today, but there is a peacefulness to the silence, a sense of the world resting after the rain's long visit. He eats slowly, savoring the warmth and substance of the meal, watching as the light fades and the first stars begin to appear in the clearing sky. The day has been good in its own quiet way, productive and calm, filled with the satisfaction of work progressing as it should. His weathered hands rest on his knees as he finishes the meal, and he feels the deep contentment washing over him like the day's rain, soaking into every part of his being. The workshop grows dark except for the fire's glow. Oswald lights his candle and sits for a time in the flickering light, listening to the last sounds of the town settling into evening, a door closing, a voice calling good night, the distant barking of a dog. The cat has returned to the hearth, grooming itself one final time before sleep. And Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, feels the rightness of this moment, this place, this life of patient making and careful work, where each day unfolds like thread from a spindle, continuous and purposeful and endlessly renewing. The fourth morning arrives clear and cool, the rain having washed the sky clean. Oswald wakes to brilliant sunlight streaming through his small window, illuminating dust motes that dance in the golden air. The temperature has dropped during the night, and when he rises, he can see his breath misting faintly in the room's chill. He dresses quickly, adding an extra layer beneath his tunic, and descends to the workshop where the hearth still holds a few glowing embers from yesterday's fire. He coaxes the embers back to life, building the fire carefully with kindling and then larger pieces of wood. The flames grow, pushing back the morning cold, and he stands close for a moment, absorbing the warmth into his body. Outside, the world sparkles with the aftermath of yesterday's rain, Every surface holds moisture that catches the early light. The cobblestones, the thatched roofs across the street, the leaves of the small herb garden visible from his window. His breakfast is bread softened in warm milk again, the simple comfort of it perfect for a morning like this. He eats standing near the fire, watching as the workshop gradually comes alive in the strengthening light. The loom stands ready, the warp threads catching the sun, each one glowing like a thin line of captured brightness. Today he will begin the weaving proper, the moment when all the preparation transforms into creation. When the meal is finished, Oswald approaches the loom with a sense of calm purpose. He checks the warp one final time, running his weathered hands along the threads from front to back, feeling for any irregularities. Everything is as it should be. He retrieves the shuttle he prepared yesterday, wound it with a weft thread, and weighs it in his palm. The boxwood is smooth and warm, shaped by decades of hands before his, and it nestles into his grip with perfect familiarity. He positions himself at the loom's bench, a low seat worn smooth by years of use. His feet find the treadles, the wooden pedals that raise and lower different sets of warp threads, creating the spaces through which the shuttle will pass. He presses one treadle experimentally, watching as half the threads lift, forming a triangular opening called the shed. The threads move with a soft, rustling sound, like wind through tall grass, and he releases the treadle, watching them settle back into place. The first pass of the shuttle is always significant, the beginning of something that will grow row by row into finished cloth. Oswald presses the treadle again, creating the shed, and passes the shuttle through from right to left. The weft thread trails behind it, crossing all the warp threads in a single smooth motion. He pulls the beater forward, a comb-like frame that packs the weft thread tightly against the beginning of the cloth, and it makes a satisfying thump as it contacts the warp. The process repeats: treadle, shuttle, beat. Treadle, shuttle, beat. His body finds the rhythm quickly, muscle memory taking over from conscious thought. The motion becomes fluid, continuous, a dance between his hands and feet and the loom's various parts. He hums his plain chant melody while working, the familiar tune rising and falling with the rhythm of the weaving, becoming part of the workshop's morning music. The sun climbs higher, pouring through the windows in thick golden beams. The workshop grows warmer and Oswald removes his outer tunic, working now in just his linen shirt and woolen vest. The physical effort of weaving generates its own heat, the constant motion, the pressure of pressing the treadles, the pulling of the beater. Sweat begins to glisten on his brow, but it is the pleasant dampness of good work, of a body engaged in purposeful activity. Row by row, the cloth begins to emerge. At first it is barely visible, just a few lines of weft crossing the warp, but with each pass of the shuttle it grows more substantial. The pattern he has chosen is simple, a basic tabby weave where the weft passes over and under alternating warp threads. It creates a strong, even fabric suitable for many purposes: tunics, cloaks, household linens. The cloth will serve well whoever eventually purchases it. The bells ring for terce, their sound crisp in the clear morning air, and still Oswald continues his steady work. Treadle, shuttle, beat. The rhythm has him now, holding him in its embrace, and time seems to flow differently when he is weaving. Minutes and hours lose their usual meaning, marked only by the gradual growth of cloth on the loom, by the slow emptying of the shuttle as thread is consumed and transformed. The cat appears at the window, dry and confident today, and jumps down into the workshop. It watches the weaving for a moment with apparent interest, head tilting as the shuttle passes back and forth, then loses interest and begins to groom itself near the hearth. The rhythmic sound of its tongue against fur adds another layer to the workshop's symphony. The thump of the beater, the rustle of threads, the purring that starts once the cat's toilet is complete. Oswald pauses when the shuttle empties, the weft thread exhausted. He retrieves another spindle from the workbench and begins winding the shuttle again, his weathered hands performing the task with automatic precision. The brief pause allows him to stretch slightly, to roll his shoulders and flex his fingers. He looks at what he has accomplished so far, perhaps 4 inches of cloth, the beginning of what will eventually be many yards. When the shuttle is full again, he returns to his position at the loom. The sun has shifted, the light now falling at a different angle, illuminating the far corner of the workshop where his tools hang on the wall. Each tool casts its own distinct shadow, the cards with their wire teeth, the various shuttles of different sizes, the warping board now empty, the spinning wheel standing silent in its corner. He resumes weaving, the rhythm returning immediately. Treadle, shuttle, beat. His graying auburn hair falls forward slightly, and he brushes it back with the back of his hand, leaving that faint trace of lanolin from handling the wool. The motion is unconscious, automatic, his attention focused on the work, on maintaining the even tension that creates uniform cloth. The morning progresses into midday. Outside, he can hear the sounds of the town fully awake now, the calls of merchants in the market square, the rumble of cart wheels on cobblestones, children's voices raised in play. Someone is hammering metal in the smithy, a ringing percussion that provides a counterpoint to his own quieter rhythms. A woman's voice lifts in song, carrying some melody he half recognizes, probably one of the old ballads that everyone knows but no one quite remembers learning. When the bells ring for sext, Oswald allows himself to stop for the midday meal. He stands, feeling the stiffness in his legs from sitting, and walks to the window to look out while blood flows back into muscles held in position. The street is busy with people moving about their business. A peddler passes with a basket of apples, calling out his wares. 2 women stand talking near the well, their voices carrying but their words indistinct. A dog trots past, purposeful and unhurried, off on some errand of its own. His meal is simple, cheese and bread, a handful of walnuts saved from last autumn, an apple from the peddler who stopped at his window when called. The fruit is crisp and sweet, the flesh white and juicy, and he eats it slowly, savoring each bite. The cat comes to sit near him, not begging but simply present, and he offers it a small piece of cheese which is accepted with dignified gratitude. After eating, Oswald returns to the loom, but before resuming, he takes a moment to examine what he has created so far. He runs his fingers over the cloth, feeling its texture, checking for any irregularities. The weave is even, the tension consistent, the threads interlacing exactly as they should. He feels the quiet pride that comes from work done well, from skill exercised with care and attention. The afternoon's weaving begins. The sun moves across the sky, the shadows in the workshop rotating slowly, marking time's passage in their ancient way. Oswald maintains his steady pace, never rushing, allowing each row to form at its own natural speed. The shuttle passes back and forth, the beater thumps forward, the cloth grows longer. His mind enters that peaceful state again, engaged yet free, focused on the work while simultaneously aware of everything around him. He notices the way the light catches particles of wool fiber floating in the air, making them glow like tiny stars. He notices the particular smell of the loom oil he applied last week, a faint mechanical scent beneath the dominant wool fragrance. He notices his own breathing, steady and even, matching the rhythm of his hands and feet. The cloth continues to emerge, inch by inch, row by row. What was potential becomes actual. What was separate threads becomes unified fabric. This transformation never ceases to satisfy some deep part of him, this making of something useful and lasting from raw materials and patient work. It connects him to all the makers who have come before, to all the weavers across centuries and continents who have sat at looms like this one, creating cloth to warm and shelter and serve. By the time the light begins its shift toward afternoon, Oswald has created perhaps 8 inches of cloth total, a good morning's work. The shuttle empties again, and he winds it once more, the motion as familiar as breathing. His weathered hands know exactly how much tension to maintain, how many turns of thread will fill the shuttle without overfilling it. The workshop has grown warm with the afternoon sun, and he opens the shutters wider, allowing a breeze to move through. It carries the scent of the season, wood smoke from cooking fires, the earthy smell of the street after yesterday's rain, a hint of something herbal from a nearby garden. The cat has moved to lie in a patch of sunlight, stretched out to its full length, completely relaxed. Oswald resumes his position at the loom. Treadle, shuttle, beat. The rhythm reasserts itself, holding him gently, carrying him forward through the afternoon. His body knows this work so completely that he need not think about the individual motions. They flow from him like water from a spring, natural and continuous and right. The bells ring for none, marking the afternoon's middle point. The light takes on that deeper golden quality, richer and warmer than morning light, as if the sun itself has ripened through the day. The cloth continues to grow, and Oswald feels the deep contentment settling over him once more, that sense of being exactly where he should be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Outside, the town moves through its afternoon rhythms. People call to one another, conduct business, tend to their various tasks and responsibilities. But in the workshop, time seems to move differently, marked not by bells or sun, but by the steady growth of cloth on the loom, by the patient accumulation of weft threads crossing warp threads, creating something that will endure long after this particular afternoon has faded into memory. The weaving continues as the afternoon deepens into evening. Oswald maintains his steady rhythm at the loom, his weathered hands guiding the shuttle with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of practice. The cloth grows longer with each pass, the fabric accumulating slowly but surely, like sediment building into stone over ages. There is something hypnotic about the repetition, something that quiets the mind and brings a person fully into the present moment. The light shifts to amber, then to rose, painting the workshop walls with colors that change moment by moment. The warp threads glow in the slanting rays, each one gilded, and the emerging cloth seems to capture the sunset within its weave. Oswald notices these things peripherally, his attention primarily on the work but his awareness open to the beauty surrounding him. When the shuttle empties once more, he pauses to assess his progress. Nearly a foot of cloth now extends from the loom, the beginning of what will eventually measure many yards. He has fallen into the particular state that weaving can bring, a meditative focus where hours pass like minutes, where the body works and the mind rests, where there is only the present action repeated with care. The bells ring for vespers, their bronze voices calling across the town, and Oswald decides this is a natural place to stop for the day. He carefully secures the warp, ensuring nothing will slip or tangle overnight, and covers the loom with a length of old linen to protect the work from dust. His legs are stiff when he stands, and he walks the length of the workshop several times, loosening muscles that have held one position for many hours. The cat has woken from its afternoon sleep and sits by the door, clearly indicating a desire to depart. Oswald opens the door for it, and the creature slips out into the early evening, off to hunt or patrol or whatever occupies its nighttime hours. The air that enters is cool and fresh, carrying the promise of another chill night, and he closes the door again after taking a long breath of it. He prepares his evening meal with the same unhurried attention he brings to all his tasks. Tonight it is a simple soup, onions and turnips simmered with a bone that still holds some meat, seasoned with dried herbs from the bunch hanging near the hearth. The smell fills the workshop as it cooks, savory and comforting, and he tends it patiently, adding water when needed, tasting to check the seasoning. While the soup simmers, he tidies the workspace, returning tools to their proper places, sweeping up the small accumulation of fiber and dust that gathers wherever cloth is made. The broom whispers across the packed earth floor, collecting debris into a neat pile that he deposits outside the door. These small acts of order and cleanliness are part of the craft, maintaining a workspace where good work can happen. When the soup is ready, he ladles it into his bowl and sits on the bench by the window to eat. The street outside is quiet now, most people having returned to their homes for the evening meal. A few late stragglers pass, a man returning from the fields beyond the town walls, his tools over his shoulder, his gait showing the tiredness of a day's labor. Two women walk together, their heads close in conversation, their voices a low murmur that doesn't quite reach his ears as words. The soup warms him from the inside, spreading comfort through his chest and belly. He eats slowly, chewing the turnips thoroughly, savoring the rich broth flavored by the bone. Outside, the sky deepens from rose to purple, the first stars appearing in the darkening blue above. Someone begins to play a pipe somewhere in the town, a simple melody that drifts through the evening air, adding another layer of peace to the settling night. When the meal is finished, Oswald lights his candle and sits at his workbench. But tonight, instead of simply resting, he decides to spend a short time preparing for tomorrow's work. He has another project waiting, a commission from the Abbey for altar cloths that will require finer thread than what he has been using. He retrieves wool he has set aside for this purpose, selected for its particular softness and purity of color, and begins the process of carding it. The motion is different from weaving but no less rhythmic, the sweeping strokes of the carding paddles, the gentle rasp of wire teeth through wool, the gradual transformation from tangled fleece to aligned fiber. He works slowly, without urgency, simply enjoying the feel of the wool, the way it changes under his attention. His weathered hands know exactly how much pressure to apply, how to angle the paddles for the best result. The candlelight flickers and sways, casting moving shadows on the walls. The fire has burned down to glowing coals that pulse with a deep red light. The workshop settles into its nighttime character, a place of shadows and small illuminations, of warmth contained within solid walls while the world outside grows dark and cool. After preparing several batches of carded wool, Oswald sets the work aside. His body is tired now in the best way, the satisfying exhaustion that comes from a full day of productive labor. He banks the fire carefully, covering the coals with ash so they will hold until morning, making the next day's fire starting easier. He extinguishes the candle with dampened fingers, and darkness fills the workshop except for the faint glow of the banked embers. He climbs the narrow stairs to his sleeping room, where the small window shows a rectangle of night sky studded with stars. The moon has risen, just past half full, casting pale light across the rooftops of the town. He can see smoke rising from chimneys, gray against the deeper gray of the sky, carrying the day's warmth upward to dissipate in the cool air. Oswald removes his outer clothing and slips beneath the wool blanket. The bed holds the day's warmth, released now from the straw mattress, and he settles into it with a sigh of contentment. His body feels heavy, ready for sleep, muscles relaxed after their day of work. He lies still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the town at night, distant voices, a dog barking far away, the creak of timbers as houses settle, the whisper of wind moving through narrow streets. His mind drifts over the day just past, not analyzing or judging but simply reviewing in a gentle way. The weaving progressed well, the cloth emerging exactly as it should. The rain-washed morning gave way to a clear afternoon. The simple meals taken, the cat's companionship, the bells marking the hours. All of it ordinary, all of it unremarkable, and all of it exactly right. Sleep begins to find him, that gradual dissolution of waking consciousness into rest. His breathing deepens and slows, his thoughts becoming less distinct, more dreamlike. Outside, the moon continues its arc across the sky, painting the world in silver. Inside, Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, drifts into peaceful sleep, his day complete, his work progressing, his life unfolding row by row like cloth on a loom, each day adding to the pattern, each night bringing the rest that allows the next day to begin anew. The night deepens around the workshop, around the town, around the sleeping weaver. Stars wheel slowly overhead in their ancient paths. The wind moves through empty streets, stirring dust, carrying the scent of smoke and earth and the promise of autumn's progression toward winter. But these things touch the sleeping man only gently, existing at the edge of awareness, while sleep holds him in its restorative embrace. In the workshop below, the loom stands silent in the darkness, the partially woven cloth waiting patiently for morning's return, for the weaver's hands to resume their work, for the shuttle to pass again through the warp, adding thread to thread, building something useful and lasting from wool and patience and skill practiced with care. The town sleeps around him, each house holding its own dreams, its own rest. The baker will rise before dawn to start his ovens. The smithy will wake to hammer metal into useful shapes. The women will draw water from the well, the children will run through streets, the merchants will call their wares. But all of that waits for tomorrow. For now, there is only this quiet night, this darkness punctuated by stars, this rest that prepares body and mind for the work to come. And in his small room above the workshop, Oswald sleeps deeply and peacefully, his breathing steady as the tick of an unseen clock, his body still holding the memory of the day's rhythms, treadle and shuttle and beat, the endless patient repetition that transforms thread into cloth, day into night, work into rest, and rest into the readiness for work to begin again. The hours pass in their measured way, the moon traveling its path across the sky, the stars bright and steady in the clear autumn night. The temperature drops further, frost beginning to form on surfaces exposed to the sky, tiny crystals of ice catching starlight and making the world sparkle in the darkness. But inside, beneath the blanket, Oswald remains warm, his sleep undisturbed, his rest complete. The night holds him gently, this weaver in his town, this maker of cloth in his workshop, this man whose life is measured in threads and days, in shuttles passed and meals eaten, in bells ringing and seasons turning. Tomorrow will come with its own rhythms and tasks, but for now there is only this peaceful darkness, this quiet rest, this simple gift of sleep after honest labor of body and mind restored, ready to wake when morning's light returns and the work begins anew. The fifth morning arrives with frost silvering the cobblestones and etching delicate patterns on the workshop windows. Oswald wakes slowly, reluctant to leave the warmth of his blanket, and when he finally rises, the floor is cold enough beneath his bare feet to make him dress quickly. He can see his breath misting in the room's chill, small clouds that dissipate as quickly as they form. Downstairs, the workshop holds the deep cold of night, and he moves immediately to the hearth where yesterday's banked coals still hold a faint warmth. He uncovers them carefully, adds kindling and blows gently until flames spring up, bright and hungry. The fire catches and grows, and he feeds it larger pieces of wood, building it into something that will push back the morning's bite. While the workshop warms, he stands at the window watching the town wake around him. The frost transforms everything into something magical and strange. Rooftops shimmer with ice crystals. The well's stone rim is outlined in white. Even the dust in the street has been touched by the cold and sparkles faintly in the early light. The sky is clear again, pale blue deepening overhead, promising another day of bright autumn sunshine once the frost surrenders to morning's warmth. His breakfast is porridge again, thick and hot, sweetened with the last scraping of honey from the small pot he keeps in the coolest corner. The warmth of it spreads through him, chasing away the night's chill, and he eats standing near the fire, watching as the frost on the windows begins to melt, water trickling down the glass in slow rivulets. When the workshop has warmed sufficiently, Oswald removes the linen cover from his loom and examines yesterday's work. The cloth looks sound, the weave even, no errors visible in the morning light. He runs his weathered hands over it, checking by touch what his eyes have already confirmed, and feels satisfied. Today he will continue, adding more length, building the fabric row by row. He settles onto the loom's bench, his body remembering the position immediately, and his feet find the treadles. The first pass of the shuttle feels slightly stiff. The cold has affected the threads, making them less pliable. But as the work continues and friction generates warmth, they soften and the motion becomes smooth once more. Treadle, shuttle, beat. The rhythm returns as naturally as breathing. The sun climbs higher, pouring through the windows, turning the workshop golden. The frost outside melts away completely, leaving everything wet and gleaming. Steam rises from rooftops as the sun warms them, creating small clouds that drift upward and dissolve. Oswald works steadily, the cloth growing under his hands, the shuttle passing back and forth in its endless journey. The cat appears at the window and Oswald pauses to let it in. The creature is cold from the morning, its fur slightly damp from the melting frost, and it goes immediately to the hearth to warm itself. It sits very close to the fire, eyes half closed in contentment, and begins to purr, that deep rumbling sound that speaks of perfect satisfaction. Oswald returns to his weaving, and the cat's purring becomes part of the morning's music. The thump of the beater, the rustle of threads, the crackling of the fire, and this vibrating contentment from the hearth. He hums his plain chant melody while working, the tune weaving through the other sounds, and the workshop feels full in a way that has nothing to do with objects or furniture, but everything to do with purpose and presence. The morning progresses in its measured way. The bells ring for fear, their sound sharp and clear in the cold air, and Oswald continues his steady work. His graying auburn hair catches the sunlight as he bends over the loom, and his weathered hands move with the automatic precision of long practice. The shuttle empties and he winds it again, the motion as familiar as his own heartbeat. By midday, when the bells ring for sext, he has added another substantial length to the cloth. He allows himself to stop, standing and stretching, feeling his spine lengthen after the hours of sitting. He walks to the window and looks out at the street where people move about their business in the full warmth of the day. The frost is completely gone now, as if it never existed, though the air still holds that particular crispness that speaks of deep autumn moving toward winter. His meal is bread and a wedge of hard sausage, dried and seasoned with herbs, the kind that keeps well and provides substantial nourishment. He cuts slices carefully with his small knife, chewing each piece thoroughly, and shares a bit with the cat who has woken and comes to investigate. The animal accepts the offering with its usual dignity and retires to eat in the corner, away from observation. After eating, Oswald takes a short walk outside, feeling the need to move his legs, to be in the open air for a few moments. He strolls the length of the street, nodding to neighbors, pausing to exchange a few words with the blacksmith who is taking his own rest from the forge. They speak of the weather, of the early frost, of how the winter promises to be cold this year. The conversation is comfortable, unhurried, the kind that exists between people who have known each other for many years. When he returns to the workshop, he pauses before resuming his weaving to examine the carded wool he prepared last night. It sits in fluffy piles on the workbench, ready for spinning. He decides to spend a short time at the spinning wheel before returning to the loom, varying his work to rest the muscles that weaving uses most. He He carries the wheel to its accustomed place and begins to work the treadle. The wheel hums to life, turning with that low, continuous sound that has always pleased him. He takes the first tuft of carded wool and begins to draft it, his fingers performing the delicate work of pulling and guiding while the wheel adds twist, transforming the loose fiber into strong thread. The afternoon light falls across his hands as he works, illuminating the wool until it seems to glow from within. The thread forms and winds onto the spindle, layer upon layer, and Oswald feels the deep satisfaction of this particular task, taking something formless and giving it structure, taking weakness and creating strength through the simple magic of twist and tension. The cat has settled in a patch of sunlight and watches the wheel turn, its green eyes following the motion with feline intensity. Whether it sees prey or simply finds the movement mesmerizing is impossible to say, but it watches without moving, completely focused, until eventually its eyes begin to close and it drifts into sleep, lulled by the wheel's steady humming. After perhaps an hour of spinning, Oswald has created several more spindles of thread, adding to his store. He sets the wheel aside and returns to the loom, ready to continue the weaving. His body shifts easily from one set of motions to another, from the work of hands and feet at the spinning wheel to the different coordination required at the loom. Both feel natural, both feel right, both are part of the larger whole that is his craft. Treadle, shuttle, beat. The cloth continues its growth, the fabric lengthening row by row. The light shifts as afternoon moves toward evening, the shadows in the workshop rotating slowly, marking time's passage. Oswald maintains his steady pace, never rushing, allowing each row to form properly before moving to the next. There is nowhere he needs to be, nothing more urgent than this patient accumulation of weft crossing warp. The bells ring for none, and then later for vespers, their bronze voices calling across the town, and still he continues. The work has him now, holding him in that state where time moves differently, where there is only the present action, the shuttle passing, the beater falling, the threads interlacing into cloth. When the light begins to fade, taking on the deeper tones of approaching dusk, Oswald finally stops. He secures the warp carefully, covers the loom with its protective cloth, and stands to assess what he has accomplished. The cloth now measures perhaps 18 inches, a substantial length, the beginning of something that will serve well whoever eventually uses it. He prepares his evening meal, a simple affair of bread and cheese and the last apple from his small store. The fruit has softened slightly with keeping, but it is still good, still sweet, and he eats it slowly, savoring the taste of autumn captured in its flesh. The cat wakes and stretches, clearly indicating it wishes to depart for the night, and he opens the door to let it out into the gathering darkness. The evening is clear and cold, the stars already appearing overhead despite the lingering light in the west. Oswald stands in the doorway for a long moment, breathing the crisp air, listening to the sounds of the town settling into night. Somewhere a mother calls her child inside. Somewhere a door closes. Somewhere voices murmur in quiet conversation. All the ordinary sounds of life continue in its endless patterns. He closes the door against the cold and lights his candle. The workshop takes on its nighttime character, shadows gathering in corners, the fire burning low on the hearth. He sits at his workbench and allows himself to simply rest, his weathered hands lying still on the smooth wood, his mind quiet after the day's focused work. Outside, the temperature continues to drop, frost beginning to form again on surfaces exposed to the sky. But inside, the workshop holds its warmth, the fire's heat, and the day's accumulated sunshine radiating from the walls and floor. Oswald feels the deep contentment settling over him once more, that sense of a day well spent, of work progressing as it should, of life unfolding in its proper rhythm. He thinks briefly of tomorrow, more weaving to be done, perhaps some spinning in the afternoon, the ordinary continuation of his craft. But these thoughts are gentle, without urgency, simply an awareness of what will come when it comes. For now, there is only this moment, this quiet evening, this peaceful end to another day of patient making. The candle burns steadily, its flame unwavering in the still air. The fire settles deeper into its coals, glowing red and orange in the darkness. And Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, sits in the gentle light and feels grateful for all of it, for the work that fills his days, for the skills his hands possess, for the simple goodness of cloth growing under his care, thread by thread, row by row, day by day, in the endless patient rhythm that has shaped his life and given it meaning and purpose. The sixth morning brings a repeat of yesterday's frost, the world once again transformed into crystal and silver. Oswald wakes to the same cold, the same reluctance to leave his blanket's warmth, and when he finally rises, he moves through the now familiar routine of dressing quickly against the chill. The frost on his window has created patterns that look like ferns, delicate fronds of ice spreading across the glass in intricate designs. He descends to the workshop and builds the fire from yesterday's banked coals, the flames catching quickly now that he has learned exactly how much kindling to use, what size wood to add first. The workshop warms gradually, and he stands near the growing fire, his weathered hands extended toward the heat, feeling the blood flow back into fingers stiffened by the cold. His breakfast is the same porridge, thick and warming, though the honey is gone now and he sweetens it only with a pinch of salt. The simplicity of it suits him. There is comfort in repetition, in knowing exactly what to expect, in the way familiar foods nourish both body and spirit. He eats slowly, watching through the window as the sun rises and begins its work of melting the frost, turning ice back into water, hardness into flow. When the workshop is warm enough, Oswald uncovers his loom and examines the cloth. It hangs there in the morning light, nearly 2 feet of fabric now, the product of days of patient work. He touches it gently, feeling the texture, the evenness of the weave, and allows himself a moment of quiet pride. This is good cloth, made with care and skill, and it will serve its eventual purpose well. He settles onto the bench and begins the day's weaving. Treadle, shuttle, beat. The rhythm establishes itself immediately, his body remembering, his hands finding their proper positions without thought. The motion is as natural as walking now, as automatic as breathing, and his mind can drift while his hands work, existing in 2 states at once, focused and free, attentive and relaxed. The sun climbs higher, filling the workshop with golden light. The frost outside surrenders completely, leaving everything wet and gleaming as it did yesterday. The cat appears right on schedule, as if it has marked the workshop's warming as reliably as the bells mark the hours, and Oswald lets it in without pausing in his weaving. The creature goes to the hearth, settles into its preferred spot, and begins its morning grooming. The morning unfolds in its now familiar pattern. The shuttle passes back and forth, the cloth grows longer, the fire crackles on the hearth. Oswald hums his plain chant melody while working, the tune as much a part of the process as the motion of his hands. His graying auburn hair catches the light, and occasionally he brushes it back with the back of his hand, the gesture unconscious, repeated dozens of times each day without awareness. By the time the bells ring for terce, he has added several more inches to the cloth. The work is going well, progressing steadily, and he feels the deep satisfaction that comes from a task moving forward at its proper pace. There is no rushing in weaving. The cloth emerges at the speed it emerges, each row taking the time it takes, and trying to hurry only creates mistakes and unevenness. The shuttle empties and he winds it again, his weathered hands performing the task with the efficiency of long practice. He has wound shuttles thousands of times, perhaps tens of thousands, and the motion requires no thought, no attention beyond the automatic awareness that prevents overfilling or uneven winding. His mind is free to notice other things, the quality of the light, the cat's content purring, the distant sounds of the town going about its business. When midday arrives, marked by the bells ringing for sext, Oswald pauses for his meal. Today it is bread and a soup he made yesterday evening, reheated now over the fire until it steams. The broth has thickened overnight, the flavors melding into something richer than when it was fresh, and he eats it slowly, dipping bread into the bowl, savoring each spoonful. As he eats, he watches the street outside. A procession of monks passes, walking from the abbey toward the church in the town center, their habits dark against the bright day, their voices raised in a hymn that drifts through his open window. The sound is beautiful, multiple voices weaving together much like threads in cloth, each one distinct yet part of a larger whole. He listens until they pass out of hearing, the music fading gradually into the ordinary sounds of the day. After the meal, Oswald decides to spend some time preparing more wool for future work. His stores are not depleted, but he prefers to work ahead when possible, to have materials ready so that when one project finishes he can begin another without delay. He retrieves fleece from the basket and begins the familiar process of examination and cleaning, picking through the wool with attentive care. The work is meditative in its own way, different from weaving but no less satisfying. His fingers move through the fleece, finding and removing debris, assessing the quality of each section. Some wool is finer than the rest, some coarser, and he sorts it accordingly, creating separate piles for different purposes. The finest will become thread for the abbey's altar cloths, the middling wool for everyday fabric, the coarsest for blankets or outer garments. The afternoon light falls across the workbench, illuminating the wool until it seems to glow. The cat has moved to follow the sun, now occupying a different patch of warmth, and it watches him work with half-closed eyes, comfortable and content. Outside, the sounds of the town continue. Cart wheels on cobblestones, voices calling, the distant ringing of the smith's hammer, a dog barking somewhere far off. When he has sorted a substantial amount of fleece, Oswald takes up the carding paddles and begins to prepare the wool for spinning. The long sweeping strokes create their gentle rasping sound, and the wool transforms under his attention, becoming light and airy, ready to be drafted into thread. The motion uses different muscles than weaving, and there is a pleasure in the variety, in giving his body different work while still remaining within the larger realm of his craft. The bells ring for none, their sound floating across the town, and Oswald continues his carding. The pile of prepared wool grows steadily, fluffy clouds of fiber accumulating on the workbench. His weathered hands move with the rhythm they know, and he feels the deep contentment that comes from useful work, from transforming raw materials into something ready for the next stage of creation. When the carding is done, he considers returning to the loom, but something makes him pause. Perhaps it is the quality of the light, now taking on the deeper gold of late afternoon. Perhaps it is simply a sense that today is a day for variety, for engaging with different aspects of his craft. He decides instead to spend the remaining daylight at the spinning wheel, creating thread from the wool he has just prepared. He carries the wheel to its place and begins to work the treadle. The familiar hum fills the workshop, and he takes the first tuft of carded wool, beginning to draft it into thread. His fingers remember exactly how much tension to maintain, how quickly to pull, how to keep the twist even throughout. The thread forms and winds onto the spindle, and he watches it accumulate with the same satisfaction he feels watching cloth emerge from the loom. The cat wakes and comes to sit near him, watching the wheel turn with its unblinking green gaze. Oswald reaches down with one hand to scratch behind its ears, and the creature leans into the touch, purring louder. The moment is simple, ordinary, yet somehow perfect. The wheel humming, the thread forming, the cat's warmth against his leg, the late afternoon sunlight filling the workshop with liquid gold. The spinning continues as the light begins to fade. Oswald works through the transition from afternoon to evening, his hands busy, his mind at peace. The thread accumulates on the spindle, layer upon layer, and he loses track of how many spindles he has filled, focused entirely on the work itself rather than its measure or duration. When the bells ring for vespers, he finally stops. The light has grown too dim for the fine work of spinning, and his eyes are tired from the focused attention it requires. He covers the wheel and carries the filled spindles to the workbench, adding them to his growing store. The thread gleams softly in the fading light, the work of his hands transformed into something beautiful and useful. He prepares his evening meal, another simple affair of what remains in his stores: bread, cheese, a handful of dried berries saved from summer. The berries are sweet and slightly chewy, and they remind him of warmer days, of sunlight and growing things, even as the autumn cold presses against his walls. He eats standing by the window, watching the street empty as people return to their homes, the day's work complete. The cat departs for the night, slipping out into the darkness on its mysterious errands, and Oswald closes the door behind it. He lights his candle and sits at his workbench, but tonight he does not immediately prepare for tomorrow's tasks. Instead, he simply sits in the quiet, his weathered hands resting on the smooth wood, his mind empty of thought, his body tired in the best way. Out Outside, the stars emerge one by one, brilliant in the clear, cold sky. The temperature drops steadily, frost beginning to form again, the cycle repeating. But inside, the workshop holds its warmth, the fire's heat radiating from the hearth, the day's work complete and satisfying. Oswald sits in the candlelight and feels the familiar gratitude washing over him, for this work that fills his days with purpose, for these skills his hands possess, for the simple rhythm of days that follow one another like threads in a weave, each one necessary, each one part of the larger pattern. Tomorrow will bring more weaving, more spinning, more of the patient work that has shaped his life. But that is tomorrow. For now, there is only this peaceful evening, this quiet contentment. This moment of rest before sleep comes to carry him gently into another night. The seventh morning arrives with clouds instead of frost, a gray ceiling that holds the night's warmth close to the earth. Oswald wakes to a different quality of light, softer and more diffused than the bright clarity of recent days. When he rises and looks out his window, he sees that the cobblestones are dry, the air noticeably milder than yesterday's sharp cold. The change in weather brings a sense of ease, as if the world itself has exhaled after holding its breath through the frosty nights. He descends to the workshop and builds the fire, though today it feels less urgent, more a matter of habit and comfort than necessity. The workshop is cool but not cold, and he takes his time with the morning routine, moving without the quick efficiency that freezing temperatures demand. There is a leisureliness to this morning that suits him, a sense of time expanding rather than pressing. His breakfast is porridge again, and he realizes with mild amusement that he has eaten the same thing for many days now without tiring of it. There is something to be said for simplicity, for knowing exactly what to expect, for the way familiar foods become almost invisible in their reliability, nourishing without demanding attention. He eats standing by the window, watching as a light mist begins to form, not quite rain but a dampness in the air that softens all edges and mutes all colors. When the meal is finished, Oswald approaches his loom. The cloth now measures more than 2 feet in length, a substantial piece of work, and he estimates perhaps another foot will complete this particular length. Then he will cut it from the loom, finish the edges, and begin the process again with new warp threads for the next piece. The rhythm of his work follows these larger cycles: preparation, weaving, completion, each phase flowing naturally into the next. He settles onto the bench and begins. Treadle, shuttle, beat. The familiar motion establishes itself, and his body relaxes into the work. Today the rhythm feels particularly smooth, as if the milder air has softened not just the world outside but also the threads themselves, making them more pliable, more cooperative. The shuttle glides through the shed with barely any resistance, and the cloth emerges with an evenness that pleases him. The mist outside thickens gradually, obscuring the far end of the street, turning the world beyond his windows into something vague and dreamlike. The workshop feels enclosed, separate, a small world unto itself where the only certainties are the loom and the fire and the patient work of hands. Oswald hums his plain chant melody while working, and the sound seems to hang in the moist air, lingering longer than usual before fatting. The cat does not appear this morning, perhaps disliking the damp, and Oswald finds he misses its presence slightly. The creature has become part of the workshop's rhythm, another thread in the daily pattern, and its absence creates a small hollow that he notices even while understanding it to be temporary. The cat will return when the weather suits it, following its own inscrutable schedule. The morning progresses slowly, time seeming to move at a different pace under the gray sky. The bells for terce sound muted, their tones absorbed by the mist, and Oswald continues his weaving without pause. Row by row, the cloth lengthens, and he falls into that state of peaceful focus where there is only the work, only the motion, only the present moment repeating itself in an endless, gentle cycle. When midday arrives, he pauses for his meal. Today it is bread and a wedge of soft cheese, younger than the hard cheese he has been eating, with a mild, creamy flavor that spreads easily. He sits on the bench by the window, though there is little to see through the mist, just vague shapes, the suggestion of buildings, the occasional figure passing like a ghost through the gray. The muffled quality of the day creates a sense of privacy, as if he and his workshop are hidden away from the world, existing in their own quiet pocket of time and space. After eating, Oswald returns to the loom. The cloth is growing close to completion now, and he can feel the subtle shift that happens when a project nears its end. There is satisfaction in this, certainly, but also a thread of something else. Not sadness exactly, but an awareness that this particular cloth, which has occupied his attention for days, will soon be finished and separate from him, will go on to serve its purpose in someone else's life while he begins again with new threads, new work. He continues weaving through the afternoon, the mist outside unchanging, holding the day in its gray embrace. The light remains constant, neither brightening nor dimming, as if time itself has paused. Oswald finds he likes this quality, the way it removes any urgency, any sense of the day moving toward its conclusion. There is only now, only this row and the next, only the shuttle passing and the beater falling. The shuttle empties and he winds it again, then empties and he winds it once more. The thread from his recent spinning is exactly what he needs, and he feels a particular satisfaction in this, using materials he has prepared himself, every step of the process touched by his own hands. From fleece to thread to cloth, all of it part of a continuous flow of work and attention and care. By the time the bells ring for none, barely audible through the mist, the cloth measures nearly 3 feet in length. Oswald decides this will be enough, that he will complete just a few more inches and then cut it from the loom. The decision brings a sense of completion, of approaching a natural boundary. He continues weaving, and each pass of the shuttle now carries the weight of finality, of being among the last rather than among the middle. The afternoon deepens, though with the unchanging gray light it is difficult to mark the passage of time by vision alone. Oswald relies instead on his body's sense of duration, on the feeling of hours accumulating in his shoulders and back, in the slight stiffness of his legs from sitting. These sensations are familiar, almost comforting, the body's honest account of work done. When he judges the cloth completely, he stops and examines what he has created. 3 feet and some inches of good, even fabric, the weave tight and regular, the selvedges, the finished edges where the weft turns back on itself, straight and strong. He runs his weathered hands over the entire length, feeling for any irregularities, any mistakes that might have crept in during the days of weaving. He finds nothing amiss. The cloth is sound. He retrieves his shears from the workbench, heavy iron scissors kept sharp for this purpose, and carefully cuts the warp threads at the back of the loom. The sound is crisp and final, each snip releasing tension, and when the last thread is cut, the cloth comes free, heavy and substantial in his hands. He spreads it on the workbench to examine it fully, and the lamplight, for he has lit a lamp against the gray dimness, catches the texture, showing the interlacing of threads, the structure that gives the fabric its strength. There is always a moment when a piece is complete and separate from the loom, when Oswald feels a mixture of pride and loss. Pride in the work accomplished, in the skill exercised with care. Loss that this particular project, which has occupied his days and structured his time, is now finished. But the feeling passes quickly, replaced by the knowledge that there will be more cloth to weave, more projects to begin, the work continuing in its endless cycle. He folds the cloth carefully, smoothing each fold with his palms, and sets it aside. Tomorrow he will finish the edges properly, hemming them so they will not fray, completing the final details that transform woven fabric into truly finished cloth. But for now, it is enough that the weaving itself is done. The evening approaches, the gray light finally beginning to dim toward darkness. Oswald prepares his supper, a simple stew made with turnips and onions and a bit of dried meat, simmered slowly over the fire until everything is tender and the broth is rich. The smell fills the workshop, warm and savory, and he eats directly from the pot, standing by the fire, too tired to bother with formality. After eating, he sits at his workbench in the lamplight. The folded cloth rests nearby, and occasionally his hand reaches out to touch it, feeling the texture, the weight, the reality of days of work transformed into something tangible. His weathered hands show the marks of his labor, the calluses on fingers and palms, the slight staining from years of handling wool, the way they curve naturally into the shapes his work requires. Outside, the mist continues, neither rain nor clear, simply moisture suspended in air. The street is quiet, people having retreated indoors early, and the town seems to have settled into sleep even before full darkness arrives. There is a hush over everything, a quality of waiting, though for what Oswald cannot say. He sits in the lamplight and feels the familiar contentment settling over him, though tonight it is tinged with the particular satisfaction of completion. The cloth is finished. Tomorrow he will begin again, but that is tomorrow. For now, there is only this quiet evening, this peaceful end to a day of good work, this moment of rest before sleep comes. The lamp flickers slightly, its flame steady but alive, casting moving shadows on the walls. The fire has burned down to coals, glowing red in the gathering darkness. And Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, sits in the gentle light and feels grateful for all of it, for the work that gives his days structure and meaning, for the skills that allow him to transform wool into cloth, for the simple continuation of life unfolding row by row, day by day, in the patient rhythm that has carried him through all his years and will carry him forward into all the days yet to come. The 8th morning brings the mist's departure, replaced by a return to clarity though not too cold. Oswald wakes to mild air and pale sunlight filtering through his window, a gentle brightness that speaks of the season's continued progression. When he rises and looks out over the town, he sees the cobblestones still damp from yesterday's mist, but drying now in patches where the sun touches them most directly. He descends to the workshop and tends the fire, building it up from the remains of last night's coals. The routine has become so familiar now that his hands perform the task almost without thought, adding kindling in just the right amount, placing the larger wood where it will catch most efficiently. The flames grow and spread warmth through the room, and he stands near them for a moment, simply being present in the morning's beginning. His breakfast is different today. He has finished the oats and turns instead to bread soaked in warm milk, with a handful of dried peas softened overnight in water and then heated. The change is pleasant, a small variation in the daily pattern, and he eats slowly, savoring the different textures and flavors. Through the window he watches the street come alive. A woman with a basket passing early, probably heading to market. A child running some errand with the quick energy of youth. A cart loaded with firewood making its way toward the wealthier quarter of town. When the meal is finished, Oswald turns his attention to the finished cloth on his workbench. Today he will complete the hemming, the final step that will make it truly ready for use or sale. He retrieves his sewing needle, a precious item of steel kept carefully in a small wooden box, and thread from his finest spinning. The work requires different skills than weaving, smaller motions, more delicate attention, the needle passing in and out of fabric with tiny, careful stitches. He settles at the workbench where the light falls most evenly and begins. The needle catches the fabric's edge, pulls through, catches again in a rhythm that is steady but slower than weaving's pace. Each stitch must be even, neither too loose nor too tight, creating a hem that will hold without puckering or pulling. His weathered hands, so accustomed to the larger motions of the loom, adjust to this finer work with the flexibility that comes from a lifetime of varied tasks. The morning passes quietly. The sun climbs higher, warming the workshop until Oswald removes his outer tunic, working now in just his linen undershirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The hem grows longer, inch by inch, his needle following the fabric's edge with patient consistency. He does not hum while doing this work. It requires more concentration than weaving, more conscious attention to each motion. But the silence is comfortable, filled only with the small sounds of needle through cloth, thread pulling taut, his own steady breathing. The cat returns around mid-morning, appearing at the window as if it had never been absent. Oswald lets it in without comment, and the creature settles immediately in its preferred spot near the hearth, licking moisture from its fur with thorough attention. Apparently the mist bothered it after all, kept it sheltered somewhere through the gray day and night, and now it has returned to reclaim its place in the workshop's daily life. The bells ring for terce, and Oswald continues his sewing. The hem is perhaps half complete now, the finished portion lying smooth and even, the raw edge ahead still waiting for his attention. There is something meditative about this work too, different from weaving's meditation but equally absorbing. The repetition of the stitch, the focus required, the way time seems to move both slowly and quickly at once, minutes stretching out while hours somehow pass unnoticed. By midday, when the bells ring for sext, his eyes are tired from the close work. He sets the sewing aside and prepares his meal, bread and cheese again, an apple that appeared mysteriously at his door this morning, probably left by a neighbor in casual kindness. The fruit is crisp and tart, refreshing after the morning's focused work, and he eats it down to the core, wasting nothing. After eating, he decides to give his eyes a rest from the fine sewing and turns instead to preparing the loom for its next project. The warp threads must be removed completely, the heddles checked and cleaned, the entire frame examined for any wear or damage. This maintenance work is necessary, part of caring for the tools that make his livelihood possible, and he approaches it with the same attention he brings to all his tasks. He begins by removing the old warp threads, cutting them away and rolling them into a ball. Even these scraps have use. They can be twisted into cord or felted or used as stuffing for a cushion. Nothing in his craft is truly waste. Everything has some potential purpose, some way of being transformed into usefulness. The threads come away gradually, and the loom emerges naked, just the wooden frame and the mechanical parts, waiting to be clothed again in new threads for new cloth. With the old warp removed, Oswald examines each part of the loom carefully. His weathered hands run along the frame, feeling for rough spots or splinters. He checks the heddles, those loops through which the warp threads pass, ensuring none are broken or bent. He examines the reed, the comb-like structure that spaces the threads evenly, looking for any damaged sections. Everything appears sound, well-maintained, ready for continued service. He retrieves a small pot of oil, rendered fat mixed with beeswax, and begins to treat the loom's moving parts. The treadles receive attention, their pivot points working until they move smoothly and quietly. The beater gets the same care, its hinges oiled until they swing without resistance. This maintenance is something he performs regularly, understanding that a well-cared-for loom will serve faithfully for decades, perhaps for generations if treated properly. The afternoon progresses while he works. The cat sleeps in its patch of sunlight, which has moved across the floor as the day advances. Outside, the sounds of the town continue. Voices, footsteps, the occasional cart, a dog barking, children playing some game that involves much running and laughter. But inside the workshop, there is only Oswald and his careful attention to the loom, checking and cleaning and oiling, ensuring everything is exactly as it should be. When the loom maintenance is complete, he returns to sewing. His eyes have rested enough now, and the afternoon light is good for close work, neither too bright nor too dim. He takes up the cloth and his needle and resumes the hemming, finding the rhythm again almost immediately, the stitches forming in their regular pattern. The bells ring for none, their sound floating through the open window in the mild air. Oswald continues his sewing, and the hem grows longer, approaching completion. There is a satisfaction in finishing work, in bringing something to its final state of readiness, and he feels it growing as the needle approaches the cloth's far corner. When the last stitch is set and tied off, he holds the cloth up to examine it fully. The hem is even throughout, the stitches small and regular, the whole piece ready now for whatever purpose it will serve. He folds it carefully, running his palms over each fold to smooth it, and sets it aside with the other completed pieces waiting to be taken to market or delivered to customers who have commissioned specific work. The afternoon is moving toward evening now, the light taking on that deeper golden quality that comes before sunset. Oswald feels the tiredness in his eyes and hands from the day's close work, a different fatigue than weaving produces, but equally honest, equally earned. He stands and stretches, rolling his shoulders, flexing his fingers, allowing his body to release the tension that accumulates from holding one position for many hours. He walks to the door and steps outside for a moment, breathing the mild air, feeling the breeze on his face. The street is quieter now as people begin to think of evening meals and rest. The sun is lowering in the west, painting the sky with subtle colors, pale yellow fading to pink, the blue overhead deepening toward the purple that will precede full darkness. When he returns inside, he begins to prepare his supper. Tonight it is eggs, a gift from the same neighbor who left the apple, cooked slowly over the fire with a piece of bread to soak up the rich yolk. The smell is simple and good, and he tends the cooking with care, not wanting to overcook them, wanting to preserve that perfect moment when the white is just set and the yolk still runs golden. He eats standing by the fire, the eggs warm and nourishing, the bread satisfying in its substantial texture. The cat wakes and comes to sit nearby, clearly hopping for a share, and he offers a small piece of egg white which is accepted with dignity. The animal returns to the hearth to eat, then begins its evening grooming ritual, preparing itself for whatever the night will bring. After eating, Oswald sits at his workbench. Tomorrow he will begin warping the loom again, starting the entire process anew for the next piece of cloth. The thought brings not weariness but a quiet anticipation, the knowledge that the work continues, that there will always be another project, another opportunity to exercise his skill and care. This continuity is part of what he loves about his craft, the way it never truly ends, but simply cycles through its phases, preparation and creation and completion, flowing endlessly into one another. The evening deepens, the light fading gradually toward darkness. Oswald lights his lamp and sits in its gentle glow, his weathered hands resting on the workbench's smooth surface. The workshop settles into its nighttime peace, the fire burning low, the tools hanging silent on their pegs, everything in its proper place. Outside, the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The street grows quiet as the town settles toward sleep. A last few voices call good nights, doors close, shutters are drawn. And in his workshop, Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, sits in the lamplight and feels the familiar contentment washing over him. Another day complete, another piece of work finished, another cycle reached and ready to begin again. The rhythm of his life continues, steady as the passing of the shuttle through the warp, patient as the accumulation of thread into cloth, endless as the seasons turning, bringing him forward into tomorrow and all the days that will follow, each one a gift, each one an opportunity to do what he knows and loves, to make cloth that will warm and serve, to live a life of purpose and meaning, measured not in grand gestures but in patient work done well, row by row, day by day. In the quiet workshop where his hands have learned their wisdom and his heart has found its peace. The 9th morning arrives with a softness that seems to hold the promise of rain, though the sky remains merely overcast, heavy with clouds that neither release their moisture nor entirely block the sun. Oswald wakes to diffused light, a gentle gray luminosity that fills his small room with a quality somewhere between dawn and full morning. He lies still for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the town waking, and feels no urgency to rise, simply a calm readiness to begin another day. When he finally stands and dresses, he notices the air is warmer still, almost balmy for this time of year. The season seems uncertain, wavering between autumn's chill and something milder, and he chooses his clothing accordingly. A lighter tunic, no extra layers, trusting the day to maintain its gentle temperature. He descends to the workshop and builds a smaller fire than usual, just enough to take away any residual dampness but not so much as to overheat the space. His breakfast is bread with a soft cheese spread, eaten with deliberate slowness while standing at the window. A fine drizzle has begun, so light it is almost invisible, more a thickening of the air than actual rain. The cobblestones darken with moisture but show no puddles, and people passing in the street walk without hurrying, unbothered by the gentle precipitation. The world feels hushed, softened, as if wrapped in wool. Today he will begin preparing the loom for new work, and the prospect brings a quiet pleasure. There is always something renewing about starting fresh, setting up new warp threads, beginning the process that will eventually result in another piece of completed cloth. He finishes his meal and approaches the loom, running his weathered hands along its frame with the affection of long familiarity. He has decided what he will make next, a length of cloth for everyday tunics, sturdy and serviceable, the kind of fabric that forms the backbone of his trade. Not fancy work for the wealthy, not the fine thread of altar cloths, but honest cloth for honest use. The decision is made. He retrieves wool from his stores and carries it to the workbench, ready to begin the carding that will start the entire cycle anew. The carding paddles come down from their pegs, and he settles into the work. The long sweeping strokes create their familiar sound, wool transforming from tangled fleece to organized fiber under his attention. The motion is soothing, repetitive without being monotonous, and he falls into the rhythm easily. The drizzle continues outside, creating a gentle percussion on the roof, a sound so soft it barely registers as sound at all, more a quality of the air than a distinct noise. The cat arrives despite the damp, appearing at the window with its fur slightly darkened by moisture. Oswald lets it in, and the creature immediately begins grooming itself with extra vigor, clearly displeased by the weather's imposition. Once dry enough to satisfy its standards, it settles near the fire, which though small still offers warmth, and falls into the kind of deep sleep that only cats seem able to achieve, completely relaxed and utterly trusting. Oswald continues his carding through the morning. The pile of prepared wool grows steadily, fluffy and light, ready for spinning. His graying auburn hair falls forward as he works, and occasionally he brushes it back, the gesture now so automatic he barely notices it. The workshop takes on a peaceful quality in the gray light and gentle drizzle, a sense of being enclosed and protected, a refuge from the damp world beyond its walls. The bells for terce ring out, their sound softened by the moisture in the air, and Oswald pauses to stretch. His shoulders feel the morning's work, not unpleasantly but with that awareness of muscles engaged in purpose. He walks to the window and looks out at the street where the drizzle continues its patient fall, darkening everything, making the world seem smaller somehow, more intimate. He returns to the carding, working through toward midday. When the bells for sext finally sound, he has prepared enough wool for several days of spinning. He sets the carding paddles aside and prepares his meal, bread and a thick vegetable pottage left from yesterday, reheated until it steams. The warmth of it is welcome despite the mild temperature, and he eats standing by the window, watching the drizzle, feeling grateful for his dry workshop and warm food. After eating, he decides to begin the spinning. The wheel comes out to its accustomed place, and he settles onto the stool, his feet finding the treadle. The wheel begins to turn with its low hum, and he takes the first tuft of carded wool, beginning to draft it into thread. His weathered hands perform the delicate work automatically, the knowledge living in his fingers rather than his conscious mind. The afternoon unfolds slowly, the drizzle continuing without change, the light remaining constant in its gray softness. Oswald spins steadily, the thread accumulating on the spindle, and time takes on that quality it has when the weather is unchanging, neither moving quickly nor slowly but simply existing in a continuous present. He does not hum today. The wheel's hum is music enough, filling the workshop with its steady drone. The cat wakes and stretches, then comes to sit near him, watching the wheel turn with apparent fascination. Oswald reaches down occasionally to stroke its head, and the creature leans into the touch, purring, before returning its attention to the hypnotic rotation of the wheel. There is something companionable about their shared presence, the human and the cat, each comfortable in the other's proximity, neither requiring anything beyond simple coexistence. Spindle after spindle fills with thread. Oswald's hands maintain their steady work, drafting and guiding, creating thread that is even and strong. The wool slides through his fingers, transforming continuously from loose fiber to twisted strand, and he feels the satisfaction that always comes from this particular task, the visible, immediate transformation of material under his care. The bells for none ring through the damp air, and still the drizzle continues. Oswald wonders idly if it will persist through the night, if tomorrow will bring more of the same, or if the clouds will finally release their burden in earnest rain. But the wondering is casual, without concern. Whatever weather comes, he will continue his work, adapting as needed, finding the tasks that suit the day's conditions. As afternoon moves toward evening, the light begins its slow fade, though with the overcast sky it is difficult to mark the exact moment of transition. Everything simply grows gradually dimmer, the gray deepening by imperceptible degrees. Oswald continues spinning until the light becomes too uncertain for the fine work, then stops and covers the wheel. He stands and stretches, feeling the day's work in his body, different muscles than yesterday's sewing used, different than weaving, but all part of the same larger pattern of skilled labor. He has created perhaps a dozen spindles of thread today, a good amount, and tomorrow he will continue, building up his stores for the warping that will come after. His evening meal is simple, bread and the last of the soft cheese, an onion eaten raw with salt, its sharp bite pleasant and clean. He eats slowly, standing at the darkening window, watching as lamps begin to appear in windows across the street, small points of warmth blooming in the gathering dusk. The drizzle has finally stopped, he realizes, though he cannot say exactly when it ceased, only that the air is now merely damp rather than actively wet. The cat expresses its desire to leave, and Oswald opens the door to let it out into the evening. The creature pauses in the doorway, testing the air, then slips away into the darkness. Oswald stands for a moment, breathing the damp air, smelling the earth and stone and smoke, hearing the quiet sounds of the town settling into night. He closes the door and lights his lamp, the flame steady in the still air. The workshop takes on its nighttime character, shadows gathering in corners, the fire reduced to glowing coals. He sits at his workbench and allows himself to simply be present, his weathered hands resting on the smooth wood, his mind quiet after the day's focused work. Tomorrow he will continue the spinning, and when enough thread has accumulated, he will begin the measuring and warping, setting up the loom for the next length of cloth. The cycle will continue, as it always does, each phase flowing into the next in a rhythm as natural as breathing. But that is tomorrow. For now, there is only this quiet evening, this peaceful end to a day of good work, this moment of rest. The lamp flickers slightly, its flame alive and dancing, casting moving patterns on the walls. Outside, the night deepens, clouds still covering the stars, the darkness complete and enfolding. And Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, sits in the gentle lamplight and feels the contentment settling over him like the softest cloth, warming him from within, a peace that comes from living a life aligned with purpose and skill, from doing work that matters in its quiet way, from being exactly who he is and where he should be in this workshop, in this town, in this moment that contains all moments. The endless patient now, where thread becomes cloth and days become a life well lived. The evening continues its gentle progression toward full night. Oswald sits in the lamplight, occasionally adding a small piece of wood to the fire, keeping just enough warmth in the room to counter the damp air. His thoughts drift without direction or purpose, simply present with whatever arises. Memories of learning this craft from his father, awareness of the texture of the wood beneath his hands, anticipation of tomorrow's work, gratitude for the simple goodness of days like this one. Eventually he rises, banks the fire carefully, and extinguishes the lamp. The workshop falls into darkness except for the faint glow of the coals, and he climbs the stairs to his sleeping room. The bed welcomes him with its familiar comfort, and he settles beneath the blanket, his body tired in that satisfying way that comes from honest labor, his mind quiet and ready for sleep. Outside, the night holds the town in its gentle embrace. The damp air carries sound softly, a distant voice, a dog's bark, the creak of a door. But these sounds reach Oswald as if from far away, already half dissolved into dreams, and he drifts toward sleep with the ease of one whose day has been complete, whose work has been good, whose life continues in its steady rhythm, patient and purposeful, like thread winding onto a spindle, like cloth growing on a loom, like days accumulating into years, all of it part of the larger pattern, all of it held in the gentle hands of time, moving forward into tomorrow and all the tomorrows that will come. Each one a gift, each one an opportunity to do what he knows and loves, to make beauty and usefulness with his weathered hands, to live this quiet life of craft and care, woven thread by thread into something whole and strong and lasting. The 10th morning brings clarity at last, the clouds having moved on during the night to reveal a sky washed clean and brilliantly blue. Oswald wakes to sunlight streaming through his window, bright and warm, and when he rises he feels the dryness in the air, the moisture of recent days finally lifted. The change is invigorating somehow, as if the world has been refreshed and renewed, ready to continue with clearer purpose. He descends to the workshop and builds the fire, though today the need is less for warmth than for the comfort of its presence, the way it centers the space and provides a focal point for the day's activities. The flames catch quickly in the dry air, burning bright and clean, and the workshop fills with their cheerful crackling. His breakfast is porridge once more, the oats replenished from a trip to the market he made several days ago. He has sweetened it with a small amount of honey, a new pot acquired from the same market visit, and the taste brings a particular pleasure after days of simpler fare. He eats standing at the window, watching the street come alive under the brilliant sunshine, people moving with a different energy than they showed during the gray days, as if the sun itself has lifted their spirits. When the meal is finished, Oswald returns to the spinning wheel. Yesterday's work produced a good amount of thread, but he needs more still before beginning the warping process. He settles onto the stool and begins working the treadle, the wheel humming to life, and takes up the first tuft of carded wool. His weathered hands find their rhythm immediately, drafting the fiber into thread with the automatic precision of long practice. The morning progresses with the sun climbing higher, pouring golden light through the windows. The workshop warms gradually, and Oswald removes his outer tunic, working in just his linen shirt, the sleeves rolled to expose his forearms. The spinning continues, steady and meditative, the thread accumulating on the spindle in even layers. He hums his plain chant melody while working, the tune weaving with the wheel's drone to create a peaceful harmony. The cat appears at the window, its fur dry and gleaming in the sunlight, clearly pleased by the weather's improvement. Oswald lets it in, and the creature immediately claims a patch of sunlight on the floor, settling into it with visible satisfaction. It begins grooming itself, not from necessity as after the rain, but from pure contentment, licking its paws and washing its face with thorough attention. The bells for terce ring out, their sound clear and bright in the dry air, and Oswald continues his spinning. The pile of filled spindles grows on the workbench beside him, each one wound with thread ready for the loom. He works without counting them, without measuring time or progress by any standard other than the natural rhythm of the work itself. The thread forms, the spindles fill, and that is enough. By midday, when the bells for sext ring across the town, he has created a substantial store of thread. He decides this is sufficient to begin the warping, and the thought brings a quiet anticipation. Tomorrow, perhaps, or the day after, he will start measuring the threads, beginning the process that will transform these individual spindles into the organized structure needed for weaving. His meal today is bread with sliced onion and a piece of dried fish, saved from a purchase weeks ago and kept wrapped in cloth in the coolest part of the workshop. The fish is salty and rich, and he eats it slowly, savoring the flavor, washing it down with small ale from the jug he keeps near the workbench. Through the window he watches people passing, women with baskets, men carrying tools, children darting between adults on some urgent errand that only they understand. After eating, Oswald decides to spend the afternoon doing maintenance work around the workshop. There are always small tasks that accumulate, minor repairs and adjustments that can be put off during busy periods, but that deserve attention when time allows. He begins by examining his tools, checking each one for sharpness or damage, oiling those that need it, setting aside one that requires sharpening for a visit to the smith. He takes down all the various shuttles from their pegs and examines each one carefully. Most are fine, their wood still smooth and sound, but one shows a small crack near the tip. He sets it aside as well, making a mental note to repair it before it worsens. The carding paddles receive attention next. He cleans the wire teeth carefully, removing accumulated fiber, ensuring they will continue to work efficiently when next he needs them. The afternoon passes in this manner, moving from task to task with unhurried thoroughness. He tightens a loose peg on the wall, smooths a rough spot on the workbench with a piece of sandstone, replaces a frayed cord on one of the heddles. Each task is small, seemingly insignificant, but together they form the foundation of reliable work, ensuring that when he needs a tool or a part of the loom, it will function exactly as it should. The cat has moved to follow the sunlight as it travels across the floor, and now occupies a spot near the door, still basking in the warmth. It watches Oswald work with half-closed eyes, comfortable and content, occasionally yawning to show its full complement of white teeth before settling back into drowsy observation. The bells for none ring out, marking the afternoon's progression, and Oswald continues his maintenance work. There is something satisfying about this attention to detail, this care for the tools and space that enable his craft. It is a different kind of work than making cloth, but no less important, no less worthy of his attention and skill. When the light begins to shift toward late afternoon, taking on that deeper golden quality, Oswald finishes his maintenance and sits for a moment at the workbench. The workshop is in good order, everything clean and repaired and ready for use. The feeling of completion is pleasant, a sense of having attended to necessary things, of being prepared for whatever work comes next. He stands and walks to the door, stepping outside into the warm afternoon. The sun is lowering in the west, painting the sky with subtle colors, gold fading to amber, the blue overhead deepening slightly. The air is still and mild, carrying the scent of bread baking somewhere nearby, the earthy smell of the street, a hint of wood smoke from evening fires being started. A neighbor passes and they exchange greetings, brief words about the fine weather, about how good it is to have the sun back after the gray days. The conversation is comfortable, unhurried, and when the neighbor continues on his way, Oswald stands for a moment longer, simply enjoying the warmth on his face, the peace of the afternoon. When he returns inside, he begins to prepare his evening meal. Tonight he decides on something more substantial, a thick soup with dried peas that he has soaked since morning, onions, a heel of bacon for flavoring, herbs from the bunch hanging near the hearth. He tends the pot carefully, adding water as needed, stirring occasionally, allowing everything to simmer slowly until the peas soften and the flavors meld. The smell fills the workshop as the soup cooks, savory and warming despite the mild temperature. The cat wakes and comes to investigate, clearly hopping for a share, and Oswald obliges with a small piece of the bacon. The creature accepts it with dignity and retires to eat privately, as is its custom. When the soup is ready, Oswald ladles it into his wooden bowl and sits on the bench by the window to eat. The light is fading now, the sun touching the horizon, painting the western sky with rose and gold. He eats slowly, savoring the warmth and substance of the meal, watching as the day settles toward its close. The street is quieting, people returning to their homes, the town beginning its transition from day to evening. The soup is good, the peas tender, the broth rich with the bacon's flavor. He eats until the bowl is empty, then sits for a while longer, simply resting in the peaceful moment. The cat comes to sit near him, not begging but simply present, and he reaches down to scratch behind its ears. The creature purrs, leaning into the touch, and they remain like this for several minutes, human and cat in companionable silence. When full darkness has arrived, the cat expresses its wish to depart, and Oswald opens the door to let it out. The night air is mild, pleasant against his skin, and he stands in the doorway breathing it in, smelling the earth and smoke and the particular scent that night brings, looking up at the stars now visible in their thousands, brilliant points of light scattered across the darkness. He closes the door and lights his lamp. The workshop takes on its familiar nighttime character, shadows and soft illumination, the fire burning low on the hearth. He sits at his workbench and allows his mind to rest, his weathered hands lying still on the smooth wood. Tomorrow he will begin the warping, setting up the loom for the next piece of cloth, continuing the cycle that has shaped his life. But that is tomorrow. For now, there is only this quiet evening, this peaceful end to a day of good work, this moment of rest before sleep comes. The lamp burns steadily, its flame a small point of warmth in the darkness. Outside, the night deepens around the town, stars wheeling slowly overhead in their ancient paths. And in his workshop, Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, sits in the gentle lamplight and feels the contentment settling over him once more. The work continues, day following day, each one bringing its tasks and satisfactions, its small challenges and quiet pleasures. The thread waits to become warp, the warp will become cloth, the cloth will serve its purpose in the world. And through it all, his hands will do what they know, what they have learned over decades of patient practice, creating beauty and usefulness from wool and skill and care. The evening holds him gently, this weaver in his workshop, this maker of cloth in his town. Tomorrow will bring its own rhythms and work, but for now there is only this peaceful darkness, this quiet rest, this simple gift of a day complete and a night beginning, the endless gentle cycle of work and rest, making and being, thread and cloth, day and night, all of it woven together into a life well lived, purposeful and patient, unfolding row by row in the quiet workshop where his heart has found its home. The 11th morning arrives with a crispness that signals autumn's deeper arrival. Oswald wakes to find frost has returned, though lighter than before, just a delicate tracing on the window glass, and a faint silvering on the rooftops visible from his small room. The air holds a sharpness that makes him breathe deeply, filling his lungs with the clean cold before rising to dress against the chill. He descends to the workshop and builds the fire with practiced efficiency, the flames catching quickly and spreading warmth through the space. The frost on the windows begins to melt almost immediately, water trickling down the glass in thin rivulets that catch the early light. He stands near the fire for a moment, his weathered hands extended toward the heat, feeling the blood flow back into fingers stiffened by the cold. His breakfast is bread softened in warm milk, simple and comforting, and he eats standing at the window watching the town wake. The frost transforms everything into something crystalline and temporary, beauty that will vanish as soon as the sun touches it fully. He watches this transformation begin, first the rooftops losing their silver, then the cobblestones darkening as ice becomes water, the world returning to its ordinary appearance even as he stands there observing. When the meal is finished and the workshop has warmed sufficiently, Oswald turns his attention to beginning the warping process. He retrieves the measuring board from its place against the wall and sets it up in the center of the workshop where he will have room to walk its length repeatedly. The board is familiar to his hands, the marks along its surface worn from years of use, and he positions it carefully, ensuring it is stable and secure. He selects one of the spindles of thread from yesterday's spinning and examines it, checking the quality, the evenness of the twist. The thread is good, consistent throughout, and he ties one end to the measuring board's starting point. Then he begins the walking that will create the warp, forward the length of the workshop, stretching the thread, then back again, creating the figure-8 pattern that keeps the threads organized and prevents tangling. The motion is meditative, the walking creating its own rhythm. Forward and back, the thread paying out from the spindle in his hand. His graying auburn hair catches the morning light as he moves, and his weathered hands maintain the even tension that is crucial for good cloth. Too tight and the warp will be strained, too loose and it will sag. The knowledge lives in his fingers, in the way they hold the thread, in the subtle adjustments they make without conscious thought. The cat appears at the window, and Oswald pauses his warping long enough to let it in. The creature goes immediately to the fire, clearly displeased by the return of cold weather, and settles as close to the flames as safety allows. It watches Oswald resume his walking, head turning to follow his movements back and forth across the workshop, the thread stretching between his hands and the measuring board in an ever-growing web. The bells for terce ring out, their sound sharp in the cold air, and Oswald continues his work. Walking has its own particular tiredness, different from sitting at the loom or the spinning wheel, using muscles in a different way. But it is not unpleasant, this steady motion, this accumulation of threads that will become the foundation for cloth. He hums his plain chant melody while working, the tune matching his footsteps, and the workshop fills with the quiet music of his labor. Thread by thread, the warp grows on the measuring board. Each strand must be exactly the same length, exactly the same tension, or the finished cloth will be flawed. Oswald maintains his careful attention, checking frequently, making tiny adjustments as needed. The spindle empties and he takes up another, tying the new thread to the old with a weaver's knot that will hold securely but can be undone if necessary. The morning progresses toward midday. The sun climbs higher, melting away the last traces of frost, warming the workshop through the windows. Oswald removes his outer tunic as he works, the motion of walking generating its own heat despite the cold morning. His linen undershirt shows darker patches where sweat has begun to form, evidence of the physical effort involved in this seemingly simple task of walking back and forth. When the bells for sext ring out, he has perhaps half the warp threads measured and ready. He pauses for his midday meal, sitting on the bench to rest his legs. Today it is bread and cheese, an apple that still holds its crispness despite weeks in storage, and he eats slowly, giving his body time to rest. Through the window, he watches the street where people move about their business. A merchant leading a donkey laden with goods, two women walking together in conversation, a child running some errand with quick, purposeful steps. The cat has moved to claim a patch of sunlight that has appeared on the floor, the warmth having shifted as the sun's angle changed. It sleeps deeply, paws twitching occasionally as it dreams whatever dreams cats have, perhaps of hunting or warmth or the simple pleasure of a full belly and a safe place to rest. After eating, Oswald returns to the warping. His legs have stiffened slightly from sitting, and the first few passes feel awkward, but soon the rhythm reasserts itself and he is moving smoothly again, forward and back, the threads stretching and accumulating. The afternoon light falls across his work, illuminating the growing web of warp threads, making them glow like captured sunshine. The work continues through the afternoon, forward and back, spindle after spindle emptying as thread transfers to the measuring board. His mind settles into that peaceful state the work allows, thoughts drifting without urgency or direction, simply present with the motion and the moment. He notices small things, the way dust motes dance in the sunlight, the particular sound his footsteps make on the packed earth floor, the warmth on his shoulders where the sun touches them. The bells for none ring across the town, and Oswald continues his steady walking. The warp is growing closer to completion now, the end in sight though still hours away. He does not rush, maintaining the same careful pace, the same even tension. Each thread matters, each one contributes to the whole, and hurrying would only create problems that would manifest later during the weaving itself. As afternoon moves toward evening, the light begins its familiar shift toward gold. The shadows in the workshop lengthen, creeping across the floor in their daily journey. Oswald's legs are tired now, truly tired, the muscles speaking clearly of hours of repetitive motion. But there is satisfaction in this tiredness, the body's honest accounting of work done, of purpose pursued with diligence and care. When the last thread is measured and in place, he stands back to examine what he has created. The measuring board is covered now with warp threads, hundreds of them, each one exact in length and tension, all of them together forming the foundation for the cloth that will emerge over the coming days. He runs his weathered hands along the threads, checking one final time, and finds everything as it should be. The bells for vespers ring out, calling across the town, and Oswald realizes the day has passed almost without his noticing. The warping has taken the entire day, from morning until evening, and tomorrow he will begin the process of transferring these threads to the loom itself. But that is tomorrow's work. For now, the measuring is complete, and he allows himself to feel the satisfaction of a major step accomplished. He prepares his evening meal with tired hands, a simple soup reheated from yesterday, and eats it sitting on the bench, grateful to be off his feet. The warmth of the soup spreads through him, restoring energy, and he eats slowly, savoring each spoonful. The street outside is quiet now, people having returned to their homes, the town settling into its evening rhythms. The cat wakes and stretches, then comes to sit near him, clearly hopping for a share of the meal. He offers a piece of bread soaked in broth, and the creature accepts it delicately before retiring to eat in private. The companionship is comfortable, undemanding, and Oswald appreciates the presence of another living being in the workshop's quiet. When the meal is finished, he lights his lamp and sits at the workbench. His legs ache pleasantly from the day's walking, and he extends them in front of him, flexing his feet, feeling the muscles slowly release their tension. Tomorrow will bring different work, the careful task of threading the warp onto the loom, but tonight there is only rest and the satisfaction of progress made. The lamp burns steadily in the gathering darkness. The fire has burned down to glowing coals, pooling red in the shadows. Outside, the night deepens, stars emerging one by one in the clear, cold sky. The temperature is dropping again, promising another frost by morning, but inside the workshop remains warm, holding the day's accumulated heat. Oswald sits in the lamplight, his weathered hands resting on the workbench, and feels the familiar contentment settling over him. Another day complete, another stage of the work accomplished, the cycle continuing in its patient way. Tomorrow the threads will move from the measuring board to the loom, beginning their transformation from individual strands into unified fabric. But that is tomorrow. For now, there is only this peaceful evening, this quiet end to a day of honest labor. This moment of rest before sleep comes to carry him gently into another night. His life continues in its steady rhythm, work and rest, making and being, each day adding to the pattern like threads in a weave, all of it flowing together into something whole and meaningful and good. The workshop holds him in its familiar embrace, the smell of wool and wood and smoke, the warmth radiating from walls and floor, the tools hanging silent on their pegs, everything in its proper place. And Oswald, 47 years old with weathered hands and graying auburn hair, sits in the gentle lamplight and feels grateful for all of it, for this work that shapes his days, for these skills his hands possess, for the simple goodness of a life lived with purpose and patience, row by row, day by day, in the quiet workshop where his heart has found its home and his hands have learned their wisdom.